Virgil Thompson began writing portraits in musical form in 1928. Trying to evoke the inner essence of personality, he wrote his portraits, mostly piano solos, from life, with the subject sitting in front of him while he composed. The idea of Thompson's portraits were so ingrained in the popular mind that Charles Schulz made them the subject of a Peanuts cartoon. When Schroeder asked Charlie Brown to come over and sit before his piano, Charlie responds, "Oh, I get it. You'll try to capture my personality in music, right?" The tragicomic ending depicts Schroeder abandoning the task without a single note, unable to find enough personality in Charlie to inspire a composition. The first American artist to offer a truly radical break with visual portrait tradition was Mexican-born Marius de Zayas, a member of Alfred Stieglitz's avant-garde circle. In 1910, de Zayas had visited Paris, where his friendship with Picasso introduced him to Cubist and primitive stylization of the figure. De Zayas began to experiment with his own theory of abstract caricature. In images like his portrait drawing of Agnes Meyer, de Zayas intended, as he expressed it, to represent the spirit of man by algebraic formulas, his material self by geometric equivalence, and his initial force by trajectories. Curving lines and ovoid shapes reference Meyer's graceful physical form. A complex algebraic formula implies intelligence, and sweeping diagonal lines animate her dynamic trajectory through life. Stieglitz exhibited de Zayas' abstract portraits at his 291 gallery in 1913 and published photogravures of them in camera work the following year. Numerous experiments with symbolic and abstract portraiture followed. De Zayas' abstractions of personality influenced Francis Picabia, who created his famous series of machine portraits for the American journal 291. Picabia's witty satiric portrayal of Stieglitz from 1915, well known to you all, depicted the photographer as a camera reaching vainly for the ideal. With the stick shift stuck in neutral, the bellows collapsed, and the handbrake engaged. Less well known is Clara Tice, one of Duchamp's female compatriots, whom he introduced to the avant-garde circle forming around Louise and Walter Arensberg. In this bizarre portrait, Tice stylized the face of publisher Condé Nast through an interlocking series of elongated female nudes. In 1915, Nast's Vanity Fair magazine had started publishing Tice's illustrations after an outraged Anthony Comstock and his Vice Squad raided an exhibition of her work. Her friends received invitations not long afterwards to a mock trial, which included Tice's statement that she would be acquitted of the charges of having committed unspeakable black atrocities on white paper, abusing slender bodies of girls, cats, peacocks, and butterflies. Here, perhaps, she is spoofing the dapper and social publisher's old-fashioned pince-nez and straight-laced mannerisms. Nast's nearsightedness caused awkward moments, according to his colleagues, who had to nudge him when he courteously returned the greetings of soliciting ladies of the night. Tice, while railing against Comstockian prudery, brought a playful, satiric, fresh approach to portraiture. John Covert, another habitué of his cousin Walter Arensberg's salons, made this intriguing, still undated drawing of poet William Carlos Williams, whose poem, I Saw the Figure 5 in Gold, was more famously evoked in a poster portrait by Dameth in 1928. Drawn to cryptography and anagrams, Covert incorporated Williams' initials and the repeated numeral 5 in this enigmatic representation. Finding a used, scarred piece of paper, he further abraded, punctured, and skinned it with sandpaper, converting 2 dimensions to 3. A symmetrical mask, a symbolic portrait, and a palimpsest of half-hidden marks that reference history and memory, Covert's image probes the unknowable complexities of Williams' character. How were the more radical experiments in figuration received? With considerable skepticism, you may be sure. At the time of de Zayas' 1913 exhibit, the New York Tribune's Royal Cortiso called the abstract caricatures the disordered dreams of some Cubist mathematician. Samuel Swift from the New York Sun described the portrait of Theodore Roosevelt, seen here in a 1914 camera work photogravure, as an enticing affair that might be the detailed drawing of a sort of electric wired bear trap with rows of sharp triangular shapes like shark teeth. Nonetheless, the very concept of portraiture was beginning to stretch, bend, and transgress its traditional boundaries. The press publicized the experiments of the artistic avant-garde as well as the innovations of popular culture. Vanity Fair's debonair editor, Frank Crowninshield, for example, who admitted his preference for anything new and fresh, offered a sampling of unexpected figural forms conflating high and low. Crowninshield published the art of Matisse, Gauguin, and Picasso, and the poetry of Gertrude Stein, T.S. Eliot, and E.E. Cummings. But he also believed in the revitalizing energy of the popular arts and insisted that Vanity Fair explore the movies, the follies, nightclubs, caricature, magic, theatrical masks, and puppetry. This wooden-headed puppet by Al Free depicts the actor John Drew, recreating that heavy-lidded, immobile face so well known to theater audiences. Hovering beyond the puppet's likeness is the implication that a modern celebrity has lost control of his fate, which is literally here in the hands of others. Frank Crowninshield considered Free's wooden-headed John Drew a masterpiece. Portrait dolls were a related curiosity. Hélène Sardou enjoyed a brief vogue for her long-limbed characterizations of Broadway stars, like this one of popular actress Doris Keane, dressed as Catherine II from her role in the Tsarina. As word spread of Sardou's whimsical creations, celebrities and socialites besieged her with commissions. Rudolph Valentino ordered 160 portrait dolls to display in movie theaters, and Sardou exhibited others throughout the country. In this complicated modern age, a New York Times reporter observed of Sardou's work, not even a doll may be just a doll. The Russian-born artist, Marie Vasilyev, had surprised the Parisian art world in the 1920s with her caricature doll portraits and stuffed heads, inspired by Cubism and African art. Vanity Fair and the New York press reproduced her creations, and critics related her work to medieval black magic or barbaric totems. Americans, like caricaturist Aline Fruhoff, commissioned Vasilyev's portrait dolls or heads while visiting Paris. Fruhoff loved her own exotic likeness, made with raffia hair and monkey fur eyelashes. "It was a mask," she wrote, "a puppet head, a caricature, and to me a highly flattering portrait all in one." In November 1922, Crownishield's interest in these experimental portrait forms coalesces on a Vanity Fair Hall of Fame page. Whoops. Depictions of all 5 nominees that month depart from the traditional photographs. Beneath Vasilyev's portrait dolls of Picasso and Matisse atop sit carved wooden caricature heads spoofing cigar-smoking poet Amy Lowell and grim-faced car maker Henry Ford. Anchoring this curious mix is a photograph of Nijinsky's sister in her makeup for a modern ballet, a horrific mask-like face that evokes primal rituals. Crowninshield equated all these portrait forms with modernity, challenging distinctions between art and non-art, adult and childish sensibilities. Indeed, the Hall of Fame page mocks anxieties about the gulf between highbrow and lowbrow culture, consciously discounting any difference between Matisse and Picasso's visual transformations and those of Vasilyev's silly-looking dolls. Nor should we, in retrospect, strain to equate whimsical illustrations and puppetry to conceptual abstractions of personality. Vanity Fair also featured Alexander Calder's wire sculptures, a reinvention of both sculptural form and portraiture, whose sophisticated innovation and playful whimsy resonate with everything along that high-low continuum of new figural forms. The point was that portraiture was an exciting and flexible paradigm. Crowninshield was also enchanted, his word, by the artifice and exaggerated theatricality of theater masks. In February 1922, he published photographs of Ziegfeld chorus girls from a recent review, all wearing masks of Hollywood movie stars. He particularly admired the masks by W.T. Benda, painstakingly crafted from wire, molded paper, glue, oil, paint, shellac, and gold leaf. In addition to wildly comic and monstrous faces, Benda produced, for the stage or promotional purposes, portrait masks. Ginger Rogers, Katharine Hepburn, Merle Oberon, and here, Myrna Loy. As Benda himself pointed out, the mask is an artificial thing. It is conventionalized. It has style. It is unreal. But this intensification of emotion or elements of character align quite neatly with that self-conscious presentation we have been discussing, what Susan Smith calls the Jungian idea of a frozen persona, a protective and false social self. As Noel Coward wrote in one of his plays of the era, "It's all a question of masks, really, brittle painted masks. We all wear them as a form of protection. Modern life forces us to. We must have some means of shielding our timid, shrinking souls from the glare of civilization." But the mask offered more than protection, just as portraiture frequently offered more than a synthesis, suggesting not only the outer social self, but the complex individual within, not just a duality, but a multiplication of identity. Previous generations had tried to transcend restrictions related to gender, class, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, or almost any social or physical difference that led to a sense of exclusion from the mainstream. But 20th century artists gradually began to address such issues. And while those outside Dada circles did not immediately feel the unprecedented freedom of expression they developed later in the century, there is a discernible willingness to address these themes, to use the stylizations of the mask to imply the concealed complexities of the human figure. Despite the efforts of Anthony Comstock, issues of sexuality and the body start slipping past bohemian enclaves into the larger culture. Gaston Lachaise's 1920s drawing of poet Hart Crane dancing nude is not specifically homoerotic. He is disguised as a Greek Kouros figure. That articulated musculature also evokes the physical culture movement at the turn of the 20th century, whose bodybuilding advocates hope to return the model male physique to an athletic Greek ideal. Disguises aside, however, as an exuberant celebration of the male body, the drawing certainly references Crane's homosexuality. Thomas Hart Benton's self-portrait at the beach with his wife Rita, painted in 1922, the year they married, is not a marriage portrait in a traditional sense, but the painting throbs with sexuality and the newlyweds' interconnectedness. His virility as he stands with his hands framing her body, her sensual curves as she leans slightly toward him, and the landscape that echoes their semi-nude forms, all mark their moment of being passionately alive and together. Female self-portraiture from this era has been explored by several scholars. As Marcia Meskimen has pointed out, since the notion of the artist as a genius was constructed in exclusively masculine terms, female self-portrayal by its very nature parodied, challenged, and rewrote masculine norms. The unabashed direct staring in images by Minerva Chapman and Pele de Lappe, defying any pretense of feminine modesty, seem more confrontational in this light. By holding our gaze, these artists challenge the objectification so frequently inherent in male depictions of women. Elaine de Kooning, while depicting herself in her artist's smock, does not hesitate to surround herself with household objects, merging her domestic and professional identities the way the male artist in his studio never would. Paul Laurence Dunbar's 1896 poem, We Wear the Mask, movingly introduces the imperative to hide racial realities. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes, the poem begins. And it concludes, we smile, but oh, great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Miguel Covarrubias's drawing of James Weldon Johnson suggests some of that stoicism while evoking the rigor and intellect of this renowned poet, author, and activist. Once again, we note that smooth, stylized symmetricality, Demuth's glazed covering, which here appears to provide both a heightened expression of race and a concealment of its implications. Not everyone admired the types Covarrubias drew for his book Negro Drawings, but most understood his deep appreciation for both the intellectual and popular entertainment aspects of Harlem. He shared this passion with his friend, the white critic and novelist Carl Van Vechten, who was himself an integrating force between black and white Manhattan. Covarrubias's portrait of Van Vechten with dark skin seems extraordinary for the time. Entitled A Prediction, the drawing implies that the critic's white pallor would soon darken with his enthusiasm for black culture. This is not blackface. It is more like reverse passing, a notion, however jokingly conveyed, that seems to reconstitute racial imaging in an era still saturated with Uncle Tom's Mammy's Darktown comics and minstrelsy. The German-born artist, Winold Reiss, famous for such Harlem portraits as Langston Hughes, brought the same racial consciousness to his Asian sitters, who endured terrible prejudices following the passage of the 1924 National Origins Act banning Chinese and Japanese immigration. In Reiss's portrait of the half-Japanese artist Isamu Noguchi, the young sculptor appears as a thoroughly modern young American, defying yellow peril stereotypes with his centered, symmetrically stylized face and serene, self-assured gaze. So, if portraiture at the dawn of the century was a crucible in which to concoct experiments from the whimsical to the profound, and to imply interior identities long concealed, what happened? By mid-century, portraiture had lost favor with the avant-garde, a hopelessly tired representative form to be strenuously avoided in an age of abstraction. As Chuck Close phrased it, the dumbest, most moribund, out-of-date, and shop-worn of possible things you could do was make a portrait. Nonetheless, just about the time after mid-century that a new generation was rediscovering Duchamp and Dada, Close and his rebellious peers reinvented portraiture, or, as Close phrased it, kicked the door open for an intelligent, forward-looking kind of figuration. By distancing themselves from that element of personality, and by flattening, enlarging, cropping, and focusing on such surface details as the units of a grid, flat, abstracted color patterns, or gestural brushwork, Close and such artists as Larry Rivers, Philip Perlstein, Alex Katz, Elaine de Kooning, and others infused the face and figure with fresh artistic potential. And with the return of portraiture, the fascination with fractured identity re-emerged with forceful, unfettered expression. Portraitists explored feminism, ethnicity, sexuality, genetics, health, the body. Our mask metaphor at this point expands. Instead of that frozen, protective public persona, we should consider other implications of the mask. Its power to impersonate and obfuscate, or to magnify and heighten elements of identity, sharpening viewers' perceptions of the humanity that lies beneath. To cite one example, Alice Neel tackled the struggles of female experience more forcefully than anyone, particularly in her naked self-portrait at the age of 80. Neel had pioneered investigations of the female body, sexuality, nudity, and pregnancy. But for all the cellulite bulging honesty shown here, Neel isn't just painting the aging process. She is forthrightly declaring her active status as an artist, Her only accoutrements are her glasses, paintbrush, and cloth. While Jacob Lawrence's unpublished Time cover of Stokely Carmichael has a mask-like quality, it is no protective covering for the anguished sense of racial injustice that it highlights. John Wilson's self-portraits convey a more enigmatic racial masking in their serene immobility. James Smalls, in his study of African-American self-portraiture, notes the difficulty of locating a black self that has been fragmented by slavery and discrimination, and the challenges of using the self-portrait as a therapeutic and theatrical gesture for bonding the public racial self with the inner private self. Wilson's beautifully drafted self-portraits express an interior essence rather than a political or emotional confrontation. But, as the artist claimed, the thing that was always uppermost in his mind was the reality of being black in this impossible world. The boldness of his dark media, the direct, forceful gazes, and the positioning of the heads on the closely cropped sheets manifest the complexity of presenting a black face in white America. As I hope this reckless romp through broad generalizations has implied, conceptual and abstract explorations of identity intersected in critical ways with the history of 20th century portraiture. At the time of the Dada artists' experiments, figural depiction was wider in scope and more fluid than we sometimes remember. And the identity issues raised by Duchamp and others engaged portraiture, even in its more conventional guises, for generations to come. It wasn't only Eros c'est la vie, for example, who could don the disguise of ladies' hats and dresses. Women could too, as Susan Hauptmann has done recently in her frilly mid-20th century costume, still raising provocative Duchampian issues about gender and sexual assumptions, impersonation, and implications of non-identity. So, in closing, I'd like to return to Dunbar's poem as a way of reinforcing for the discussions that will ensue the nuanced intentionality of portrayal and presentation. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. Thank you. Oh, yeah. If there are any questions, I would be happy to attempt to answer them. Or we could hold some for later. Okay.
Wendy, thank you so much. That was fascinating, and I'm so grateful to you for the very fertile background that you've provided for these investigations of Duchamp. I'm very intrigued by the reverse passing that you documented in the collaboration between Covarrubias and Van Vechten. And I wondered whether there was any commentary either from the two of them or their friends and peers about the significance of that transformation.
I think it was very fraught, actually. Both Van Vechten, who wrote Nigger Heaven, the novel Nigger Heaven, and Covarrubias, who published the book of drawings, Negro Drawings, were controversial. And both of them were criticized for playing on stereotypes. But both of them were also advancing concepts. They were friends with Harlem Renaissance writers and musicians and dancers and the whole range of Harlem Renaissance artists. But it was fraught. It was difficult for both of them to completely step beyond those stereotypes, even though they were taking racial imaging into a completely new direction. I don't know that there's any documented discussion between the two of them, and certainly this is a joke, and a private joke that he would have given to Van Vechten. But I think it was certainly a tribute to Van Vechten's very deep immersion in Harlem and his willingness to bring lots of white friends to Harlem to enjoy the entertainment possibilities there, and also to bring black intellectuals into Manhattan for social mixing and to facilitate their ability to find publishers and this sort of thing. So I'm not sure it's a completely easy line to draw between the bad stuff and the good stuff. I think it was really a very fraught moment where white people were trying to negotiate new ways of new strategies for representation. Thank you very much. Oh, one more. One more.
Thank you very much for your talk, Wendy. I really appreciated it. I wondered, in looking at some of the caricatures that you put up there, I hadn't quite thought about caricature as a mask. And of course, you're talking about identity and self-identity, but I wondered how that huge dialogue that's going on at the time of caricature really kind of plays into caricature as mask. I mean, I wondered if you could speak about that a little bit more.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I was trying to resist talking about caricature.
No, I'm sure you were.
But caricature of that time period, between the two wars, is really focused on the celebrity image. Mm-hmm. So it really is the social mask. For so many generations, satiric portraiture had peered beyond the public front to probe weaknesses that were inside, for ways of pulling off that public mask and showing corruption or weaknesses that the public wasn't seeing. And so this is really a completely different approach to satiric portraiture, and one reason why it doesn't seem as cruel or as probing is because it was all about the mask. It was really playing with that public image. So Garbo's big feet and Clark Gable's big ears, I mean, that's what they would be. That was the public image, the celebrity image, and that's what the caricaturists were exaggerating. So celebrity caricature at that time period was absolutely the mask. It was exactly this sort of frozen